So I had this rare opportunity to test ride a WR250R. Now I made a lot of videos in the past, KLX300, 250, CRF300, TTR250, WR250F, so many different kind of videos, but I never made one about the WR250R because, well, I've never really test rode a WR250R. Now, the catch is I have no idea what year it was, what mods, nothing. Out of the blue, we just started following each other, kind of. I was on my 701 Enduro and he was on a WR250R. I kind of saw him entering from the street into the trail area. The worst part of it all, I did not have my GoPro with me. I unfortunately do not record much anymore, but I'm trying to get into it. A lot of these videos are still like the older videos. But anyways, I was out riding in our local trails here in Pueblo. Took out my 701 for the day and I noticed a blue dirt bike, you know, thinking, oh, that's probably just a WR250F, maybe a plated one. Until he got closer, then I realized, oh, it's a WR250R. And these bikes really intrigued me because I've always wondered what kind of power it had compared to the KLX300 or the 250. I decided to somewhat follow him. Interestingly enough, though, when I departed, he started to follow me and vice versa. I think he had a lot of interest in my 701 and just kind of like the same ordeal with his WR250R. Finally, we kind of just ended up chatting a bit. I kind of like, hey, you know, that's a pretty sweet WR250R and vice versa on the 701. Eventually, we ended up trading the bikes and riding around a little bit on the trails. We got some awesome, great local single tracks around the area, really smooth, fast going, with the exception of some water washouts where you really have to slow down a bit. So I was able to test ride the WR250R on pretty fast going single tracks and smooth trails. I didn't really push it to its limits with rocks and stuff like that. But the very first thing I did was try to remember how it felt versus my KLX250/300 that I tested a few times. I'm like, this is really interesting. The KLX300 should technically be a little bit more powerful versus the WR250R because of the CCs. No? Well, we all know CCs is very relative to the machines. There's a lot more things that make up power, but the KLX300 and the WR250R on paper should almost be kind of no different in terms of power, but I don't remember the KLX300 pulling as hard as the WR250R. The WR250R just seems quite a bit more torquier up on the climbs and stuff like that. Now, I cannot speak for the 6-speed ratio, as when it comes to the KLX300 and even the 250, I remember the 6th gear was almost useless. It was kind of pointless after going 65 miles per hour. I was unable to increase speed going uphill. It still provided a little bit more pull than the 250, but not much of a difference. But the numbers, you know, they still barely climbed. Keep in mind, I was on a stock KLX300. I was unable to do anything as it was not my bike. You know, but anyways, you know, the KLX300 did have a little bit more oomph. And when I was talking to the owner of the WR250R, I asked him, how does it do on the high-speed roads in Colorado? He described it was kind of similar, where once you reach 6th gear, it still pulls up to, he told me up to like 70, 75 miles an hour, but not quickly. A lot of the times, he still had to be on the pipe full throttle for it to climb up in numbers. But the way he described it seemed like it delivered way more power at the high end versus the KLX300/250. Remembering the KLX300 at 6th gear almost did not want to pull anymore at all, going uphill, flat or downhill, of course, it will pull, but still barely did anything once exceeding 65 miles per hour. Now keep in mind, we are in Colorado where elevation makes a huge difference in power, especially the uphill roadways. These little 300cc engines become like a little 200cc engine. I'm sure if I were to go to a flat state like Florida or Georgia, whatever, it will pull in any gear just fine. Of course, not like a 701 or a DRZ400. So people in the high mountain states, you probably know exactly what I mean. Anyhow, back to the WR250R. To me, the WR250R was just a bit more peppier than the KLX300 down low, and also in the mid-range. Like, it just seemed to keep miles, probably going around 20, maybe 25, 30 miles per hour. A lot of the times I was going 15 because of the trails. And in this area, we have a lot more whoops where, believe it or not, a stiffer suspension would do a lot better. And the WR250R just seemed way more manageable in these whoops with the harder hits and the faster, higher end speeds. The one thing I am dying to try the WR250R is in the rocks and in the tighter trails up in the higher elevation. Unfortunately, that day when I test rode this guy's WR250R, it was all in very smooth, easygoing trails, nothing difficult. And also, since it was not my bike, I did not just want to start doing hill climbs or more aggressive riding, but I felt like the WR250R was probably just as aggressive as an entry-level enduro bike. Just, I would say, slightly more plusher ride, slightly heavier, of course. The best way I can describe it was almost like a KLX300R. Not the Dualsport version, but the middle ground of an enduro bike. I would probably say it's not as aggressive, but kind of almost there, but just a longer gear ratio. You have to be on the pipe a little bit more to pull, but it was pretty peppy and pretty aggressive, more so than the KLX300. But in my honest opinion, I think the WR250 felt like, let's just say it's in the future and it's year 2030, I don't know. Maybe KLX will make it the KLX350. And I would probably say that is what the WR250R feels like, just with much better suspensions, and the bike overall was just taller and not as crammed as the KLX300. What I mean by crammed, it just seemed like a more full-size kind of bike, I would say. But in all honesty, as long as the height of the seat does not intimidate you, the KLX300 250 versus the WR250R and even the CRF300, I'm gonna say the WR250R, I think it is a better choice hands down.